welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Katie, I'm a full-time artist, and today I'm going to be flipping through the first half of my current sketchbook, which is the Royal Talens 13 by 21 centimeter size. There are 80 sheets in these Royal Talens sketchbooks, so I find that a full sketchbook tour takes a little bit too long, so I always split them into two. And I've gone past the halfway point, so I'm excited to show you what's inside. I'm really proud of this sketchbook. There are definitely some spreads I'm really proud of, and I really like the colours and the vibes throughout, so I think it's a good one. But if you do want to look at any of my other sketchbooks, I will link up here in the cards and down in the description my previous sketchbook tours. So let's get on with it. And we start with this spread, which was referenced from photos that I took when I was in Santorini last year. I really love the colours of the island and I really wanted to showcase that. So I absolutely love yellow, so this was the main building I wanted to draw in this one, and there were pops of pink and obviously blue everywhere. So I really like this spread. I think there's lots of texture to it. I used gouache and then coloured pencils, so quite a simple one in terms of mediums because sometimes I use so many different things, but I quite like the coloured line work as well. Then we have this spread. This was done on an Emma Carlisle Patreon session. Everything that I mention I will link down below, so all the information should be down there. I think this was a Google Maps Street View in Bologna, and I put these funky shapes around, and this was really different for me because usually I just did like square or rectangle shapes. And I also put down a colour first, so you can see this like ochre colour that I used as my base and then I worked on top. And actually this led on to quite a few spreads in this sketchbook that you'll see that was stemmed from ideas from this. So this was actually quite a turning point in my artwork. Here's another spread with those sort of blobby shaped panels. Again, this was an Emma Carlisle session where you kind of zoomed in each time, so it created a narrative. So this was the first view, then we zoomed in closer to the house, then in the window where we had this cat, and then the woman by the fire. And I thought that was a really lovely idea, and I just really love the colours in this spread. I used gouache mostly, but I did prep the page first with a beige Posca. So underneath all these panels is that beige, which you can see mostly on this one, but it gives a really nice warmth. You wouldn't know that I'd used it on these panels, but it definitely adds a nice atmosphere to this spread. And then I used coloured pencils on top. This spread, very different, full of colour, but I absolutely loved mixing my markers with pan pastels. So that's what this spread is made from. So I used my Tombow brush pens and then my pan pastels over the top. And it really mutes it. It has a really nice texture and I think it really softens the piece as a whole. I used a blue for the sky, and you can also see some little pops of colour here throughout, which I used my Neocolour pastels with. And I just really like the feeling of this one, really nice view, and I do really like this like purple cornflower colour coming in. Then some tree study, so one of the things I wanted to practice this year were trees. So this was a good spread. It's quite simple. I mostly used Tombows and then coloured pencils on top. I really like the texture on this one and it was fun to use a pink over here as well. Two quite simple panels. These feel a little bit more tame for me. They're not as experimental as I like, but I really like the colours here. I really enjoy using this orangish yellow Neocolour on like green grass and then the pops of pink, which I tried to tie them together by using, again, that sky blue Neocolour and the salmon pink Neocolour, and so they do tie in nicely. But this one feels quite safe. I don't think I was really feeling it that day, but it still feels very peaceful. Okay, these next spreads are from a Patreon session on my own Patreon where we were doing a plein air month, and obviously we can't always go outside, so we used Google Maps again for these plein air views. I'm not very proud of these. I wasn't happy with what I made, but I really enjoyed the process and it's always really nice to create with my patrons. But I knew I wanted to come to that session and be really loose. So I used my acrylic inks and you can see that I am being loose with my marks. These were done on timers, which also helps with loosening up, but it definitely feels unfinished. And this was the other one. This one was a view in Montenegro. Again, I used my acrylic paints and I was being quite slapdash with it, and then used quite minimal marks because I ran out of time just for like the details. And I do like this house, but this is definitely unresolved. This one I do really like. This one was referenced from one of the books I shared in last week's video, from the Old English Villagers book, and this was mostly done with gouache but a lot thicker, and some coloured pencil details for all of the houses, and then I added gouache on top for these lovely flowers. And this one just feels really nice to me. I like some of the textures that I've built up here with my coloured pencils, and also I always enjoy adding in all the windows and like the sliding on the buildings. This was in preparation for one of my Patreon drawing sessions, and again, because it was plein air month, I was focusing on views in other countries, and again I used Google Maps Street View to reference all of these. These are in the same area, in Assisi in Umbria, and I used my beige Posca here as well. I didn't do it all over because I wanted to keep the clouds really white, so mostly for the buildings and the ground where I put the beige Posca, and then to create this softness I put some pan pastel over the top. Okay, so these next two spreads are from the live stream on Patreon, so that was the practice for these spreads. Again, you can see where the interesting shaped panels are coming back in. I'm also using the beige Posca, which I learned I really liked from the other one, onto here for some of the buildings. And this was referenced from a live stream on YouTube, so there's a lot of live camera feeds which I've shared on Patreon before, and then we use those live moving image feeds to draw these. So it's really nice to see like the little people and the cars moving about whilst we were drawing instead of just using a still image. And this was another one from a live camera feed. This one felt a lot harder than these, even though it's a totally different view, but there's still so many angles, and I did struggle a little bit with all the different lines and things. But overall I think it was okay. There's obviously a lot going on, but I do like how the little people I've added on add that sense of scale. Okay, this one I hate. This is my least favourite spread in this sketchbook, but I did film this one because I was recording a video about Stabilo woody pencils, and again I'll link that down below. But I feel like the less said about this one the better, because it's something I'm really not proud of. Whereas this one I really like, and this was recorded and created completely plein air, and the recording of this one is on my Patreon. And again, I used brush pens and pan pastels. So it's the first time I used pan pastels outside, and then I also finished it with neocolours. But this one was done completely on location, and it was the first time that I'd used that mix of tombos and pastels outside of my studio, and I was really pleased to see that I could do it and it worked completely how I like to work in my studio. Sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect from work here and outside, so this felt like a really nice way to merge them, and I really love the softness in this countryside view. Next up we have this spread, which again was actually the same place as this view, but using some of my photos that I took on our walk back at home. I really like this. I like how this page almost merges onto this one, and then I like how this one isn't in a panel but this one is. So this was a view the other side of this little building, and then there were lots of little forget-me-not flowers around, so I really like the mix here and I really like the colours. Again, you can see I've got that same sky blue neo colour. It's one of my favourite colours and I really like adding it. I think it just adds a perfect pop of colour, and I'm really proud of these cows as well. This was done with Tombow brush pens, neo colours and coloured pencils. Next up we have a fish spread, so if you've seen any of my other sketchbook tours you'll know that fish are generally my go-to when I don't know what to draw, and everything so far in this sketchbook was done on my daily art challenge. So I was creating a lot. I was creating 5 days a week, and so sometimes I just wasn't feeling it, and so when that happens I'll paint some fish. And this was done with gouache, coloured pencils and neocolours, and I always try and do these in 20 minutes just so that I don't tighten up. I've got a video about finishing my daily art challenge as well on my channel, so again I'll link that down below. This spread felt like a turning point for me. This was done thanks to a workshop from Lucia Layfield, who is Wild Ink Sketch on Instagram. I took one of her workshops on her website, and it was basically about seeing your garden in a different way. Now, this isn't my garden, this is my wonderful grandma's garden, which is absolutely beautiful, and I took these photos a long time ago in 2019, and I put them down into my sketchbook. I was really trying to seek connection in my sketchbook at this point because I'd been doing the daily art challenge for such a long time, and so I felt like I was just drawing for the sake of drawing and I wasn't really feeling what I was drawing. So merging in some journaling and photos that actually mean something to me in this style really helped to unblock me. And this was mostly done with gouache and coloured pencils. I don't think there's any Neocolour in here. So quite a simple one, but there's a lot going on in this page, and I wasn't too tight. I was keeping things really quite loose, and I think that definitely helped. So this one is a more pastel coloured spread. This is all done with gouache and then a tiny bit of coloured pencil, so not as much as I would normally use. And I feel like you can really see the softness, and I haven't used like my really harsh marks here or come in with Neocolours or anything like that. But I like how this one comes over across the page again. This was done with an acrylic base, so I used some house paint tester samples to put down this block of colour and then gouache over the top. You can also see the pink journaling and writing coming through from the previous spread. So I really like how you can see how things develop and interlink with my pages. Next up is another one with acrylic ink that I never finished. This was referenced from Google Maps, but I just didn't come back in for my further layers. So this is basically how most of my pieces start, with this big mess, and then I use the detail layers to neaten it all up, but I just didn't on this one. Another one that was inspired by Lucia's work, and this was part of her Noticed and Found, I think it's called. That was a project on Instagram where you just sort of notice what's around you. So this was on a walk around the block, and I just noticed all the colours in the weeds basically, and it was surprising how much there was just from like the walk to my house to the post box. And I really like this. This was done with Tombows and coloured pencils, and it feels very journaling, and I really was inspired and happy to merge that sort of journaling style with my sketchbooking. Next we have these two panels which I really like. This was acrylic ink, so finally did a spread where I was happy with the base of acrylic ink, and then I really focused on texture, so I used my coloured pencils on their side and really built up that softness, and I think it was really nice. I love the colours, I really amped that up from the reference photos, and I like the pink that I've added in as well. You can see the Neocolours coming back in here as well as this English red colour, and I just feel like this gives a really nice peaceful vibe. Next up we have these birds, which are referenced from a bird book. Again, you can see how I'm merging in the journaling, so I'm adding way more text and information on my pages than I have done before. But I really like drawing birds. I used gouache for the main colours and then worked on top with the texture and the details with coloured pencils. And some of the proportions of the birds aren't correct because I didn't sketch first, but I still really like this spread. Then another spread about sort of noticing things around you. Again, these were picked up on one of my walks. I used gouache for the base here and then some Derwent Inktense pencils, so it creates a really nice thick line with lots of texture. And I dip that straight into my water and then onto the page, and I find that just creates a really nice effect. This spread was referenced from some photos I took in the Royal Pavilion Gardens in Brighton. So this was obviously not drawn in 2020, but that's when I took the photos. I remember I totally forgot to put in the top of the dome here on this structure, so I wish I had remembered that, but I still really love this spread. There were so many flowers in the gardens, and I really love the way this looks. I feel like this was inspired by the spread from my grandma's garden, but again you can see I've put in my Neocolour touches that feel very me. And also I like the layout. Again, I've gone over the other spread, which you've seen in other pages, and then done a close-up of these foxgloves over here. So you can see how I'm trying to sort of break out of those panels in this point. I'm trying to spread things onto the other page, and I really like having like a further away view with a close-up. Totally different for me, this was a 4 colour palette challenge. I was inspired by the 3 materials challenge on Instagram, but I accidentally added in another colour. So this is very different and not something you normally see in my sketchbook, referencing from a copyright-free image site and really trying to focus on where I was putting the colours. This soft blue lilac colour is a Tombow, and then I used a pink, dark indigo and light grey coloured pencil. And I just did this on the sofa one evening, so it just felt like it came from a place of inspiration. And I almost didn't even share it on Instagram. Another spread inspired by the close-ups and then the further away view. These were sent to me on Twitter from someone who worked in this place. So this is the Jardin Botanique Jean-Marie Pelt. Apologies if I'm butchering the pronunciation, but the photos were absolutely gorgeous, and I really enjoyed creating this spread using gouache and coloured pencils. This one, again, I have recorded a video on. This was for how I draw and paint birds, which is here on my YouTube channel. I did sketch a little bit here just to try and get the proportions right, and then I went in with my gouache and coloured pencil details on top, as well as a little bit of Neocolour just to add in more texture. It was really fun to add some eggs into this spread, and then also the little labels, which you can see has been inspired by all the journaling spreads as well. Next up we have these 2 pieces. These were referenced from my own photos of Leap Beach. You can see that beige acrylic paint layer coming through here, so I did that as my base and then used gouache on top. I really wanted to try and get the dramatic sky in this one, so you can see I really focused on the lighting, and it's a little bit more realistic than I would normally go. This spread was really fun. This was using oil pastels only, and then I think I used a tiny bit of coloured pencil for the details like the eyes. But this was really fun. I loved using these bright colours, and it didn't turn out how I imagined in my head, but I still really like it. I like the use of the brown papers just so that the white really pops, because it wouldn't on the ivory paper, and it just feels like a really fun spread. Okay, you can see how this one links back to the previous ones. Exactly the same sort of technique, but I used gouache here for the base instead of acrylic ink. And then again, I just worked on top with loads of layers of texture with coloured pencils and then my Neocolour pops of colour. These were again referenced from the Old English Villages book, and it's just a page that feels really calm for me. I really enjoy drawing these views. Some more trees. So this was actually recorded for a Patreon tutorial, so I recorded how I draw trees with only brush pens, colour pencils and then Neocolours, which you'll see on the next spread. This one was a really fun one, just focusing and teaching my patrons how to draw trees with those mediums. And then these were the quick ones using Neocolours and really building up and trying to focus on movement and texture in the trees. This spread is a fun one. Again, I usually do these spreads when I'm not sure on what to draw, so I take a really broad reference and then I create these little panels of landscape views. This was done with Tombows, and again this was recorded for a YouTube video where I share how to use Tombows in different ways, including using it with pan pastels and water to create some of these different effects. This was from a Patreon session with Emma Carlisle, again using Google Street View maps. So many amazing views on there, I really do find it helpful. I do have a video about finding good views, so I will link that down below as well. But lots of colour in here, and 20 minutes, so I had to work quite fast, but there's a lot of texture in here that I do like. And it's also a type of landscape that I wouldn't normally go for. These were in the same session, these were 15 minutes each. And these feel a lot softer, and I definitely prefer these, but it was also using colours I don't normally use. So there's this brighter pink and this softer green, and I really like the way that it pairs together. And again, I used the Posca here for the pink, and then mostly coloured pencils and brush pens for the base, and some Ecoline brush pens here for the grey. I just really like a lot of the details, and I think if I had more time I could add even more to it, but I also didn't overwork them. This was from an Odd Orange session. I did most of this session in another sketchbook, but these were some of the florals at the end, and I worked too quickly, so I found a reference on Pexels as well, just to finish off this spread using pan pastels and some coloured pencils. This was another one from that same session. I just did this swallow in 8 minutes, again with my pan pastels and Neocolours here, and just trying to keep things super loose. Next up was this Street View World Tour session with Sue Heston. This is a challenge that's hosted by Herb Coyle and Ronky Ponk over on Instagram, and it happens every month. And I love this. I was really focusing on a limited colour palette again. You can see the beige Posca coming in here, some Tombows, and then that dark indigo luminance pencil. I really like this spread. It does feel quite different for me. There's a lot more detail and texture, but I remember being really pleased with this one, even though it feels different to my usual work. Next up we have this view of Lymington. So I was preparing for the group exhibition that's happening this summer, that's currently on at Chalks Gallery in Lymington, and I was really trying to just practice the views because I wanted to create something inspired by that town. So this was very quick and mostly done with gouache and then lots of Neocolour as well as a Liquitex paint pen here. The beige Posca, the dark indigo, so I definitely have my favourite supplies, which you'll see in another spread, but this one was just really fun. But you can see that I was really trying to use it just as a warm-up. Okay, so this is the spread that uses all my favourite supplies, and I did record a YouTube video for this one if you want to see the process, and also I think there's a really good one to reference if you want to know my most used colours and tools and things that I use all the time in my art. I really love this one. You can see the bubble panels coming back, and I also put the base colour down and worked on top, which definitely adds the warmth to the spread. You can see actually, if I bring it closer, how dirty this spread is. So I get a lot of comments about how I keep my sketchbook clean, and actually it's not as clean as it looks on social media. Obviously when I do photograph the work, it's when I've just made it, so I don't tend to work the next page straight afterwards. So when I was pressing on this side, I forgot to put a piece of paper here, so a lot of this has transferred onto the other page. I don't like using fixative in my sketchbook. I try to avoid it because of the smell. So what I usually do is just get little scraps of paper. I tore these from a magazine, or brown paper parchment, and I tend to put it between my pages like this, so that if I am working on the other side, unless I forget, it will transfer more onto this piece of paper than it will onto the artwork. And I find that works great. I generally have 5 or 6 that I then work through in my sketchbook, so I don't keep it on every single page because it would get too bulky. So I just move it along, because I find that if you're working further along in the sketchbook, it won't affect the pressure on the front few pages. So I hope that makes sense. That's one of the questions I get asked the most, as well as what type of sketchbook I use. But if you do have any other questions, then please do let me know, because I'm always happy to answer them. Like I said, I'm really pleased with the sketchbook, and I hope you enjoyed seeing it. I hope it's given you some inspiration, and I'm really looking forward to filling the rest of the pages. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a creative week ahead, and I will see you next Sunday with a new YouTube video. See you later.